Hey, it's Super Tom Brother here. My hair's grown out since my initial face reveal, like way back a couple years ago. Um, prob- Probably around COVID time. I don't know. I'll have to check the date on the video when I showed my face last. Anyway, I wanted to put something in perspective. I'm a big fan of the Nintendo Switch, but people tend to ignore certain things about it. This is real important. People are saying that this hybrid model should be the thing going forward. But unfortunately, they're only looking at the sales of the Switch itself. They're not looking at the sales of previous generations and comparing them. Let's look at something real quick. Uh, how do I reverse while I'm recording? This is weird. Oh well, I guess I can't show you because I've got the camera pointed at my face. But you know what the systems look like when I talk about them. Let's talk about the NES and the Game Boy. NES sold more than 60 million units, which at the time was pretty much unopposed because the Master System really didn't get a foothold in the US, and Atari was basically like trying to crawl out of its own grave. And so that didn't really work out for them. 65 million, about, yeah, is about how many units the freaking NES sold. The Super Nintendo sold a few less, like in the 50 millions, but the Game Boy was continuing to sell toward the end of the NES generation, throughout the entire SNES generation, and throughout the entire N64 generation, until it was replaced by the GBA alongside the GameCube. And the Game Boy by itself sold over 113 million. So you have to add that total to the totals of each generation. 113 plus 65. That makes 100 178 million units for Gen 1 NES. Wow, Switch hasn't topped that. Let's see, the 55 million for the Super Nintendo combined with 113 million of Game Boy. That is 168 million units. Switch hasn't topped that either. 32 million for N64. This is a little easier to top, ain't it? 32 million plus 113 million equals 145 million. Switch hasn't topped that. GameCube and Game Boy Advance sold relatively low, mostly because nobody wanted the GameCube because it didn't have a DVD player, and the Game Boy Advance was only around for around 4 years before it was replaced by the DS. I mean, they continued to make Game Boy Advance games during the first 3 years of the DS, but most people moved on. So that didn't sell very well. Then you get to the frickin' DS and Wii. 151 million DSs, second best console of all time, mind you, and over 102 million Wii. That means that generation was the best-selling generation of consoles ever. 100 and let's see, 102 million for Wii, 151 million for DS. That is 253 million units sold. Nobody has topped that, not even PlayStation, because the PSP did not go alongside the PS2. It was alongside the PS3, essentially a crutch for it to lean on. The Vita tried to go along with the PS4, but again, Sony basically proved itself to be better at home consoles than handhelds. So we come to the 3DS and Wii U. The Wii U, again, didn't sell very well. So this, the 3DS basically had to carry that generation all by itself, and it did pretty good. Actually, I'm pretty sure if you combine the 3DS and Wii U, it's better than the Switch's total sales. So what's my point in all this? The Switch isn't just replacing the home console. It isn't just replacing the handheld. It's replacing both. Which means if you compare it to previous generations, you have to combine the sales of both platforms it's replacing. And the Switch really hasn't topped two platforms in any more than the N64 and GameCube generation. If you count the Game Boy Color as its own system, which Nintendo doesn't, then the Game Boy Color and N64 probably sold less than the Switch. And the Game Boy Advance and GameCube, yeah. But every other generation seems to have sold incredibly well, combining the home console and handheld prices together. So, how can one console sell as great as two? It doesn't seem like it can, unless they keep the Switch going for the full 10 years they claim to do it. That's probably why we haven't gotten a Switch Pro or a Switch 2 anytime soon. They're trying to stretch out this generation so that the one console can outsell the two console method they've done before. I don't know if they'll make it, but they're sure as hell going to try. So, hold on to your butts. We're either getting a Switch Pro and the Switch ultimately doesn't outsell the previous generations, or we don't get it and you're basically left with outdated graphics while Nintendo tries to break their own records. We'll see how this goes. This is Super Tom, brother. Let's see if we can't get some comments down there. And try not to be rude. I mean, you can post your own arguments without cursing or without insulting people personally. I mean, just try to be nice, but go ahead and bring like constructive criticism to anything I might have missed. Goodbye.